Hey everyone, welcome. I'm going to go over the documented changes to industrial era cultures, but first a couple quick notes. First, I've set up a Discord where people can chill and talk about Humankind and the content on the channel, or really just come hang out. You can come save me from talking to myself and the bot with the link in the description. Second, in case you didn't know, I'll be streaming Humankind on release at 12 noon US Eastern Time, which is currently Eastern Daylight Time, or EDT in case you need to convert it, and that'll be here on YouTube. I'll be going straight to the highest difficulty, which may be a mistake with all the changes, but only one way to find out. Now let's get into the industrial era culture changes. So first we have the Austro-Hungarians, who have had a pretty minor change to their legacy traits in my opinion. It does make it a little bit better though. So in the closed beta we had +2 influence on influence district, and plus 50% turns before cities or outposts are converted by other cultures. For release, this has been changed to +1 influence on district and +1 influence on emblematic districts. Presumably on emblematic districts, this effect would stack, but I'd have to test that in the game once it's released. Overall, this is going to increase the Austro-Hungarians' culture or influence outputs, in my opinion. It won't be too much of an impact. You do lose that 50% turn increase before being converted, but as an aesthete producing a lot of influence, you shouldn't have too much difficulty with that anyway. Next we have the British, who have actually had a pretty substantial change to their legacy trait, which is probably for the better. Before we had +5% money and +5% science per number of territories on capital. This has been changed to a flat +10 money and +10 science per number of attached territories on capital. I still have an issue with the wording here. It's not clear to me if this means all attached territories in your entire empire, which would be very thematic for the British, or if this means the number of territories attached to your capital. Either way, it's a pretty substantial change. Usually percentage modifiers are going to be better than flat bonuses, so I would probably consider this a fairly substantial nerf to the British, unless your capital, for some reason, is not very well developed. Next we have the French, who have had a couple changes. First is that their legacy trait has gone from +20% science to +10% science in all cities. Fundamentally, the French did need a little bit of toning down in this legacy trait, I think, but also the technology tree has been significantly reduced in science costs for a lot of technologies. So you couldn't really leave that +20% science there without kind of breaking the game in favor of the French. The emblematic quarter has also seen a bit of a change. Specifically, it used to provide this bonus where it would increase the amount of time it took for your territories to be converted to another culture. It no longer has that effect, but it does have this +1 influence per adjacent district now. So that extra influence generation will help prevent other cultures from taking over your territories anyway. Next are the Germans, who have lost the +3 combat strength on heavy weapon units, and the Ottomans now have this bonus, as well as a 50% production reduction on producing heavy weapon units. That's really a mouthful to say. On release, instead, the Germans now have +3 combat strength on naval units, +3 combat strength on air units, and -20% industry cost on units. Overall, I think this will help them scale better into the late game, and particularly on maps with a lot of water, it's going to be more useful than the +3 combat strength on heavy weapons units, because both naval and air units are relevant when it comes to dominance of the oceans. Air units in particular, we haven't really gotten a feel for yet until the contemporary era is revealed. I suspect they'll be fairly powerful, so this +3 combat strength on air units is going to come into play, and then obviously this 20% unit industry cost reduction is going to stack with any other sources that you have. There's also been a very minor change to the emblematic quarter. It's simply adding +10 pollution, which really makes sense. So Germans overall, I would say that they have gotten a slight upgrade depending on the relative strength of air units and naval units relative to heavy weapon units. Next are the Italians, and the only change for the Italians are a small change to their legacy trait. So Commons Quarters were nerfed overall in their influence production for the release build, so the Italians now are getting an extra +1 influence on Commons Quarters, which is a nice little boost because the Italians were really relying on Commons Quarters for at least part of their influence production, because you really wanted to build a lot of those. Not that they really struggled because of their emblematic quarter anyway, but it's nice for the Italians to really buff up the commons quarters relative to some of the other cultures. Next are the Mexicans, who have been changed from plus 20% food on all cities for their legacy trait to plus 10% food on all cities. And I believe this makes it the only percent bonus that we know of in the game since the Franks have had their legacy trait changed. So plus 10% food is the only percentage modifier that we know of at this point to total food. The emblematic quarter has also been changed, and this has gone from plus 1 food on district producing food to plus 1 food on food producing tiles. So this is really just a straight up buff because the tiles also include quarters that are producing food in addition to all the tiles that you're exploiting. In the beta, there were several bugs, and I believe the Hacienda was included in this, where descriptions that were plus 1 food on districts were actually applying to all tiles that you were working, including districts as well as exploitations. So fundamentally, this isn't a change from the beta, but it's good to know that it is not a bug and it is intended behavior now. So next are the Persians, who I would say are the first culture we've seen so far to really have a major change to what they do. First, their legacy trait reduces the share production industry cost by minus 25%. And we saw that in the closed beta. But now on release, it also reduces all constructibles industry cost by 25%. So this includes units, infrastructure, and districts. So you're basically getting a permanent industry cost reduction on everything you build in your entire empire. And this is so much better than it was, because the Persians, really, you picked them because you wanted their emblematic unit that could really rush effectively and knock out a lot of enemy units early in a fight. But now it feels like they're actually something that is worthy of a builder culture because of this massive discount on producing things. Additionally, the emblematic quarter, the caravanserai, is going to provide plus 5 industry, which is up from plus 3, but it also gives a plus 1 money per trade route, which is really thematic. And we see in the later eras a little bit of mixing and matching with sort of different types of the FIMS output. So, some of the builders can get a little food and some of the merchants can get a little industry. So it's nice to see that being integrated a little bit more into the Persians, and I think it makes a lot of sense for this particular district. So the Persians, in my opinion, have really moved up in the world with these changes, and I'm really looking forward to playing them. So next are the Russians, who have had a change to everything about them, really. So in the closed beta, they had the legacy trait, which is that all their units would get plus 10 experience on creating a unit per number of territories on all cities. They've added the text, plus 10 war supports increased when capturing a city. So basically, when you capture a city, you're going to get more war support. I personally didn't have a major issue with holding up war supports in the beta. I guess if you are doing like really rapid fire wars and don't have time to build your war support, that might be more useful. Personally, I don't think that's that big of a change. The emblematic unit used to have the ability move and fire. It's been updated to multi-move, much like the, I believe, the Hunnic hordes and the Mongol hordes. So basically, it can use all its movement points until they're depleted, and it ignores zones of control. Fundamentally, it's not too different from what it was before. It's a little bit more versatile in some ways, but that's the only change that's been updated on the wiki at this point. And really, I think the problem with the Cossacks here are other issues related to their relative strength to the Dragoon. Finally, the emblematic quarter has been updated ever so slightly to provide plus 3 influence, as well as plus 5 stability rather than minus 10 stability. And I think these are pretty important on these like really niche districts. It's kind of defensive with the health regeneration. So, it's only useful in certain situations, and even then it might not save you. So having that plus 3 influence and plus 5 stability, you can at least kind of justify getting it before you actually need it, rather than just purchasing it when you need it and then forgetting it exists. Overall, I still wouldn't rate the Russians very highly after these changes, but we'll have to see what they look like when the game is released. So next we have the Siamese, who have had a change to their legacy trait, like many of the other industrial era cultures. So in the closed beta, we were getting +3 industry per trader on all your cities, which I actually really liked personally, but this has been updated to +3 industry per district on all cities. So this isn't per production district, this is for every district in your cities. You're also getting +1 money generated from ongoing trade on all cities. Overall, I would probably say this is a straight up buff to the Siamese. You're almost always going to have more districts than you're going to have traders, and you're getting extra money from your trade now. So, I mean, I can't complain too much. I did like the flavor of having that industry per trader because it required you to make a trade-off in terms of how you were allocating your population. But, you know, getting a straight buff to a culture, no one who likes that culture is going to complain. And finally, we have the Zulu. So the Zulu have seen some updates as well, and I actually really like the updates the Zulu have gotten. So in the closed beta, they used to just have +50% health regeneration on units for their legacy trait. They've retained this, but they've also added +2 combat strength on units starting their turn in allied territory. So that will be your own or anyone you're allied with. This actually gives the Zulu a much more prominent identity, in my opinion. So the Poles in the previous era were this culture that relied a lot on defensive fortifications in order to play this defensive style of play. The Zulu, on the other hand, are a culture that are relying on units to be their defense. And this is something that's played into with the updates to the emblematic quarter as well. So the Warriors of Zulu has been updated to add +10 experience on creating units on the city or outpost. So really what this means is that the Zulu can actually get out these really experienced units by stacking up a few of these emblematic quarters, and when they're defending themselves, they're going to be getting an extra combat strength buff on all of their units. So this actually gives their generic units like musketeers and that sort of stuff a more defined role, or line infantry, or what have you. And additionally, it also makes the Impy more important, because we've seen with some of the pre-release material that there's this new buff called Dog-In, which is going to reduce the amount of damage that Dog-In units are taking from ranged attacks. While the Impy, because it's a melee unit, and because it's going to be getting these combat strength buffs from starting in allied territory and having experience, it means that it can go into melee relatively effectively, remove that dug-in bonus because it's a melee unit, and actually be somewhat combat effective because it's also getting a combat strength bonus against units that have a higher base combat strength than it does. So overall, these are really good changes to the Zulu, in my opinion. I don't think they're as strong as the other cultures in the era for the most part, but these were really much needed, and I'm happy they made them. So that brings us to the end of the updates for the industrial era cultures. Like always, there may be other updates that haven't been captured in the wiki yet, and we'll be talking about all these different changes on release. I hope you'll join me for my live streams next week, and hopefully I will see you on Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in.